Yo, what's going on, guys? Dirca Monster here, and we're doing a Dirca deck tech. And the commander of our choice today is the Gitrog Monster, aka Git-R-Done. Now, this is normally a very scary commander to sit across from. A lot of people build it very optimally. A lot of similar dredge cards, which none of those are in here as far as the dredge options. This is a Dirca deck tech, meaning it's very jank, very casual, very low power in general. But we do try to complete the game with a combo, which this creature lends itself very well to comboing. So let's get into it. What is the Gitrog Monster? It is a 5 mana 3 black and green, meaning all of the cards in your deck can only be black, green, or colorless. It is a 6/6 frog horror with Death Touch, which most people forget about the Death Touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature unless you sacrifice a land. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. And whenever a land card goes into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So, like I said, very well lends itself to combo. It's a lot of text on it. But what is the point of the deck? What are we aiming to do? Well, like I said, we are a combo deck. And the combo is a bit of jank pieces slapped together. Some of which are pretty staples for the deck. Some of which are kind of tossed together for how I like to play. There, you don't need to have all the pieces on the field at one time. It's kind of situational based on what's going on. But first things first, we're going to look at Sylvan Safekeeper. So Sylvan Safekeeper is a 1 mana 1/1 human wizard. It says sacrifice a land. Target creature you control gains Shroud, meaning it cannot be targeted by spells or abilities of any kind, yours or otherwise. This is not only a great way to protect some of your creatures, but also the main way you're going to be sacrificing lands. And again, whenever you sacrifice a land, you're going to draw a card with Gitrog Monster. Of note, when targeting something with Sylvan Safekeeper, if you let that ability resolve, let's say I target the Gitrog Monster and sacrifice the land again and target the Sylvan Safekeeper, and I don't have any more creatures, I actually can't sacrifice any more lands because I don't have any creatures to target because these both have Shroud. However, if I don't let those abilities resolve, if I sacrifice a land and target one of my creatures, and then before that ability fully resolves, I can sacrifice another land to target again and again and again and again until I let one of them resolve. Then the rest on the stack would fizzle because the creature now has Shroud, so that ability can't target it anymore. But the important part of sacrificing lands will happen. And then after that, we have the Noose Constrictor, a very innocuous creature, 2 mana, 1 and a green, for a 2/2 snake with reach, which is sneaky reach is what I like to call it. Most people forget about it, but that's not why it's in here. The important part is discard a card. This creature gets +1/+1 till end of turn. We don't care about the buff on it. We usually don't want to risk it in combat in any way, shape, or form, but being able to discard a card from our hand is key and crucial because it's free. So if we draw lots of cards, which we do with Gitrog Monster, we can get lands in hand and discard them, which would draw us a new card. And if we don't want that land in hand, discard it again to draw a new card. And then we've talked about putting lands in the graveyard with this combo. So how do we get them out? Well, there's a few different strategies. The weakest one that I tend to usually go for only as an absolute emergency, it's the backup to the backup plan. I typically do this more in the mid game, is the Mending of Dominaria. This is a 5 mana enchantment, 3 green for a saga. So when you place it down, it starts on chapter 1, and then at the beginning of your main phase, it'll move to the next chapter. So when you place it down, it says chapter 1, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, and you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Double checking, make sure that said may. So this mills 2, and then if it hits a land while your Gitrog Monsters out, you will draw a card. And if you mill a creature that you don't want in there, such as one of your combo pieces, you can get it back to hand. And then it rolls around to your next turn. You go through your untap, upkeep, draw main phase. This will trigger again. Go down, do it again. Mill 2, return a creature if you like. And then on the third time, when it goes back around to your turn again, and you hit your main phase, this will sacrifice itself, go into your graveyard, and it says return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, then shuffle your graveyard into your library. That includes this card because it will be in your graveyard. The important part is that it spews all of your lands onto the battlefield, and they are untapped, ready to be used if they are not tap lands on the card itself. So I tend to use this in the mid game, early to mid game, to try to ramp into things really quickly and get ahead, because sometimes when you stall out, you're sacrificing lands to dig and you're kind of running out of them, so getting a big jump on that helps a lot. Now, we said that that is the backup to the backup plan. The backup plan is World Shaper. This is a 4-mana creature, 3 and a green for a 3/3 Merfolk Shaman, and whenever it attacks, you may put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. Again, another self-mill way to get lands in there. And then whenever it dies, return all lands from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. Again, not the most perfect way to do it, but it is a way to do it. We said that this is the backup plan, and we have multiple ways for it to die via sacrifice and such. So if this is the backup, what is the main game plan? Well, the best way to get this effect, none other than Sylvan Reclamation. This is a 4-mana, 3 and a green for a sorcery. Return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. No shenanigans, no hoops to jump through. That's it. It just does what you want it to do. So why are we putting all these lands in the graveyard just to bring them back with these cards? The answer is Retreat to Hagra. Retreat to Hagra is a 3-mana enchantment, 2 and a black. It says landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1. Target creature gets +1/+0 and death touch until end of turn, which is neat, but we always go for each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So the idea here is that you spill a bunch of lands on the field with your ability to ramp out with your commander, and then you're getting a lot of the lands into your hand. So you're able to spew them into the graveyard with Noose Constrictor, sacrifice them from the field with your Sylvan Safekeeper, and then get them back to the field with one of these 3 methods, all while this is on. So you sack the 40 lands, you get this on the field, put them back, kill the whole table at once, easy peasy. Now, how do we go about getting these combo pieces besides the draw? We have a couple tutors in the deck. Nothing too crazy. I usually play budget tutors. And by usually, I mean entirely. So, first up, we have a Diabolic Tutor, one of my classic favorites. 4 mana, 2 and 2 black, for a sorcery that says search your library for any card, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. Plain and simple. And then the slightly worse version, kind of a side grade, is Rathacek's Right. 5 mana for the exact same effect, except pay 1 black mana to cycle it, meaning you can discard this card and draw a new card. That is in an emergency only situation where you have the combo pieces, but you need something else. You don't have time to cast this to try to search for it. You want to hope you draw into it, or just draw into literally anything useful, but you only want to spend 1 mana to do so. Now, if we can't do this, we do have a backup plan. The combo fails or is being interacted with too much. We have the go wide strategy using Titania, Priest of Argoth. 5 mana, 3 green for a 5/3 elemental. When she enters the battlefield, return a land card from your grave to the field. Doesn't matter what kind of land, any land. And there's definitely going to be some in there because you're playing Gitrog Monster. And then whenever a land you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, create a 5/3 elemental creature token. So obviously, with the things that we're going to be doing, putting lands in the graveyard from the field, you can create an army of 5/3s. Another huge card in this deck is Worm Harvest. Worm Harvest is a 5 mana sorcery, 2 and then 3 colored mana, a green-black hybrid 3 times. So that means that you can pay either or, green or black, for each of those pips. So that means 2 of any kind, and green, black, green, black, green. It doesn't matter, any combination of the sort. As long as it is a green or black mana, it can be used to pay that cost. And it says create a 1/1 black and green worm creature token for each land in your graveyard. Now, a very important part that most people either don't know about or forget about or just have not been familiar with this mechanic, it has retrace, meaning you can discard a land from your hand and then pay the mana cost for this spell to cast it again. So not only are you recasting this thing that's probably going to be spewing out creatures at a pretty decent rate, but also you're fueling it to do so because you're pitching a land directly into the graveyard to do it. This creates a lot of little dudes very, very quickly. And what do we do with the little dudes? We pump you up. 3 mana for a enchantment, Beastmaster's Ascension, 2 and a green. It says whenever a creature you control attacks, put a quest counter on this, and as long as it has 7 or more, creatures you control get +5/+5. It doesn't matter how long it takes for you to do this. You don't have to attack 1 a turn to get it. If you attack with 7 creatures in 1 turn, all 7 will go on here and immediately pump them up. So you can see how putting a bunch of lands in the graveyard, using your worm trace, getting them out, and then next turn dropping the Ascension and swinging with more than 7 worms can immediately get you 6/6 worms crashing into people. Very powerful. Now, another way to get some creature tokens going is I always say this wrong, so I want to be sure, Krasda Guildmage. Always mess that up. It's green black, so 2 mana for a 2/2 elf shaman, 4 mana, 3 mana, 1 and a green black. Target creature gets +1/+1 and intimidate. And let me double check, see if it says it on here. Can't be blocked except by artifact and or creatures that share a color with it. So for our case, green or black for our commander or an artifact creature. And then for 4 mana, 2 green black, sacrifice a non-token creature, create X 1/1 green sapling creature tokens where X is the sacrificed creature's toughness. So the bigger the booty, the more saplings we get. Now, once we have all these, in order to help us go wide, not only do we have the Beastmaster's Ascension, but we have Decimator of the Provinces. This is a 10 mana 7/7 Eldrazi Boar, and it has Emerge, saying pay 9 mana, 6 green, and you can sacrifice a creature. Let me double check and make sure I read this correctly. You may cast a spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the Emerge cost reduced by that creature's mana cost. So if you have a 4 mana creature, you only have to pay 5 for the Emerge, is the idea. And then when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +2/+2 and trample until end of turn, and this also has trample and haste. So you go wide, and then you go big, and then you go over, and you go through. Now, another benefit to going wide is basically forcing people to not have a board with sacrifice effects. So we have Butcher of Malakir, 7 mana, 5/4 flying vampire warrior. Whenever this creature or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. This makes it so that you can chump block forever with the little guys and de-incentivize your enemies from attacking you because they don't want to give up a creature, trading for a measly little 1/1 token for something else on their board, more than often than not. It also makes it so that any of our sacrifice effects turn into effectively removal on the board. So we've talked about the combo, the tutors, but what we haven't talked about is protection. And our protection comes in the form of a few different suite of cards. Notably, Reclaim, 1 mana for an instant. Put target card from your graveyard on top of your library. Now, we've mentioned before that we draw a lot in this deck, so we can immediately get it back to our hand multiple ways. But another thing is, if they get a key combo piece into the graveyard, we can, or something vital to us anyway that we want to reuse, we can wait until our opponent's end step just before our turn, cast this for 1 green, put it on top of our library, and draw it for the turn. Another similar card is going to be Pulse of Marasa. 3 mana, 2 and a green for an instant. Return target creature or land from your graveyard to your hand and gain 6 life. It's a little bit of life gain. It's a little bit of recursion for your creatures and lands, so that if they destroy a key land, you need to get it back, or if they destroy a creature you need and you need to get it back, or if you're out of land drops but you have this and you're at a crucial point where you need to keep lands coming onto the field so that Gitrog can sacrifice them and keep the engine going, this can be used in a pinch. Another thing we have is Dirca's Mender. 5 mana, 3 green black for a 4/3 Gorgon. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target creature card or enchantment from your graveyard to your hand. So if they get rid of your Retreat to Hagra or one of your key combo creatures, this can be used to recur them, get them back, just in case. And then to prevent them from doing all these things to your creatures, we have things like Lightning Greaves. This is a 2 mana equipment, and it says equip for 0, so it can be equipped immediately. And the equipped creature gets haste and shroud. Again, meaning that they cannot be targeted by any spells or abilities. And the haste means that they can attack or activate abilities that require them to tap right away, as if they didn't have summoning sickness. Another thing we run is Heroic Intervention. So if they want to interact with more than just our creatures, such as our lands, our enchantments, or anything else, if they want to get rid of multiple things in mass, this prevents all of that. So this is a 2 mana, 1 and a green instant. Permanents you control get hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Permanents. That means everything that's not an instant or sorcery. And then finally, we have one more piece of protection, and that's protection for you, the player. Haze of Pollen is a 2 mana, 1 and a green instant. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. That means damage done to your creatures and by your creatures, and done to you. And if you don't need it, you can pay 3 mana and cycle it, meaning you discard it and draw a new card. But a lot of times, people like to Zerg you down if they know that the combo's coming. So this can basically give you that one little turn to just give you one more try to get the combo off on your next turn and prevent somebody from just taking you out right away. So we've talked about the protection. Let's talk about the the mana ramp. So one of the things about this deck is that you are pitching a lot of your lands, and that can be dangerous because you do still need to cast your spells. And in order to help us do that, we have different things to ramp us, such as Deathcap Cultivator. This is a 2 mana, 1 and a green, 2/1 human druid, and it can tap for a green or a black, which is very important. Most mana dorks don't tap for black. They usually tap for green that you can get access to in green. And then it has Delirium. If you have 4 more card types in your graveyard, this creature gains Death Touch. Usually possible, but not super relevant. We mostly want it for the mana. And then the next mana dork we have Channeler Initiate. 2 mana, 1 and a green for another 2/1. And I'm sorry, for a 3/4, not a 2/1. I was looking at the wrong one for a second. This is a human druid, and then when it enters the battlefield, you can put 3 -1 counters on target creature you control. But we're gonna want to put them on Channeler Initiate because you can tap them, remove a -1 counter from it, and add 1 mana of any color. So again, it's your mana dork, and it turns into a mediocrely decent creature once you've used it through all of its counters, which we only use it when we have to. Another fun way that I think is an underrated card to get mana is Frontier Siege. This is a 4 mana enchantment, 3 and a green, and when it enters the battlefield, you choose either Khans or Dragons. And for our purposes, we are always going to choose Khans because at the beginning of your main phase, each main phase, you add 2 green mana to your mana pool. You get 2 of these a turn, these main phases. So you instantly get 2 mana if you cast this in your first main phase and then move through to combat and go to your second main. This immediately activates, giving you 2 mana. And then you effectively get 4 free mana split up between 2 parts of your turn every turn, which is very nice. Highly underrated. The next thing we have is our suite of artifact ramp. The classic, you know it, you love it, you hate it, Soul Ring. 1 mana for an artifact that taps for 2 colorless mana. And then we have the much worse Soul Ring, Worn Power Stone. 3 mana for an artifact that comes in tapped, and you can tap it to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. And then we have the Commander's Sphere. 3 mana for an artifact that says tap, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. For us, it would be green and black. And then you can sacrifice it to draw a card. Of note, you can tap it for mana and then sacrifice it to draw a card for optimal value when doing so. And then we have the Wayfarer's Bauble. This is a 1 mana artifact that says pay 2 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it. Search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Similar, we have things like Cultivate. 3 mana, 2 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic lands, put 1 of them on the field tapped, and 1 into your hand, and then shuffle. We also have Far Wanderings. 3 mana, 2 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for a basic card, and then put it on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. However, if you have Threshold, meaning you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you can search your library for up to 3 basic land cards and put them on the battlefield tapped. And this deck almost always has a way to do that threshold, get that threshold online very easily between drawing lots of cards, sacking lots of lands, playing things, getting things removed, and so on and so forth. And then we have ways to get very specific lands, such as Hour of Promise. 5 mana, 4 and a green for a sorcery. It says search your library for up to 2 land cards. Doesn't say basic, lands of any kind. Put them on the battlefield tapped. And then if you control 3 or more deserts, create 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. We only have 1 desert, so that line is completely irrelevant. And one of the land cards we always get is the one that we will always target with the Sylvan Scrying when possible. This is a 2 mana, 1 and a green sorcery. Search your library for a land card. Doesn't matter what kind, what land it is. Go ahead and get it. Put it into your hand and shuffle. And what, pray tell, is the land that we go and search for? None other than Drowned Temple. Very underrated card. It's a land that taps for colorless, or you can pay 3 mana and return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Of note, you can actually tap it to help pay for that 3 mana cost. This is by far the strongest land in the deck because you can sacrifice it to Gitrog Monster and return it to keep drawing cards and not go down in mana. And then another very, very similar card that's great to be sacked and used for mana is Crumbling Vestige. This is a colorless land that enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters, you can add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and then afterwards, it'll only tap for colorless. Great to get down that fixing of whatever color you need, and then sacrifice it later to Gitrog Monster. Another great land for putting in the graveyard and getting something out of it is Ash Barrens. So this is a colorless land, taps for 1 colorless. However, most importantly, it has basic land cycling 1. So for 1 mana, you can discard this card and go get a basic land of any kind and put it in your hand. So not only do you go get the land out of your deck and put it in your hand, but this goes into the graveyard and you draw a card. Similarly, we have the only desert in the deck, Desert of the Glorified. This is a tapped land that can tap for a black, and you can pay 1 and a black to discard it from your hand to draw a card. So effectively, pay 2 mana, 1 and a black to draw 2, because you'll discard this and draw this, and then resolve this trigger to draw another one. Another great land for this is one that I don't ever see other people play, but I play a little bit, probably too much. is Rupture Spire. This land enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you pay 1 mana, and you can tap it to add any color to your mana pool. So it's great mana fixing, and the cost is that you have to pay 1 other mana when it enters. However, there are times when we just won't do that. We'll play this, won't pay the mana, and so it comes in, we don't pay, it goes to graveyard, and we draw a card with our Gitrog Monster. Speaking of, Blighted Woodland, another wonderful land to be put not only in the deck, but in the graveyard. So it taps for 1 colorless, but for 4 mana, plus tapping this land, so 5 total, 3 in a green, tap it, sack it, and search the library for up to 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. So not only do you go and get 2 lands and ramp up, but you also draw a card from sacking this, and Gitrog Monster will trigger. Another one in the Blighted cycle is the Blighted Fen. So for tap and add a colorless, and for 5 mana, plus tap this, 4 and a black, sacrifice it, target opponent sacrifices a creature. Draw a card and remove a creature, effectively, essentially. It's not great, but it's an option. And I love having utility on lands because they can just sit there innocuously and then you can get something out of them later. And then we have the sacrifice lands. That's pretty much their entire function, is mostly to sacrifice. Evolving Wilds, tap it, sacrifice it, go search your library for a basic land card, put it in the battlefield tapped. So not only do you go get your color fixing, but you draw a card in the process. And Functional Reprint, Terramorphic Expanse, same exact thing. Similar to these two, we have Warped Landscape. Usually considered a very bad card. It taps to add 1 colorless, or you can pay 2 mana to tap it and sack it and search your library for a basic land card tapped, and then shuffle. Usually don't want this kind of effect. However, with Gitrog, it turns mana fixing and card draw into one thing. And then from there, we look at cards that care about cards going to the graveyard. Lands going to the graveyard. First things first is the Groundskeeper. This is a 1 mana 1/1 human druid, and for 2 mana, 1 and a green, you can return target basic land card from your graveyard to your hand. Great way to keep that engine rolling and not run out of steam when you're sacrificing your lands. Another great card that's new, came out of the Phyrexia All Will Be One, Conduit of Worlds. So 4 mana for an artifact. It's 2 and 2 green. You may play lands from your graveyard. This is essentially the same as a Crucible of Worlds and Ramanam Excavator, but I don't have either of those. But I do have a Conduit of Worlds. Then you can tap it and choose target non-land permanent in your graveyard. If you have not cast any other spell this turn, you may cast it, and you cannot cast any other spells this turn. Activate only as a sorcery. It's a very niche ability, but I guess it's good to have rather than not have anything at all. The main purpose of it is to play lands out of the graveyard, though. And then we have the Centaur Vine Crusher. This is a 4 mana creature. Starts out as a 1/1 plant centaur. It has trample. When it enters the battlefield, it enters with a +1 counter for each land in all graveyards, not just yours. And then whenever a land is put into a graveyard from anywhere, I wanted to double check and make sure I was reading that correctly. So your graveyard or any other graveyard from anywhere, hand, deck, library, or hand, field, library, doesn't matter. You may pay 2 mana, green, and return this card to your hand. So great to get out there later on and pump up, and easily recursive. And then we have the World Breaker. This is a 7 mana 5/7 Eldrazi, 6 and a green. It has devoid, meaning even though this card looks green, it has a green mana symbol. This card is considered colorless. And then when you cast it, not when it enters, but when you cast it, exile target artifact, enchantment, or land. And then it has reach, another sneaky reach. And then for 3 mana, 2 and specifically a colorless, sacrifice a land and you may return this card from your graveyard to your hand. The colorless is a odd stipulation that they put on some of these Eldrazi, but sacrificing a land is something we don't mind doing, and it's a great way to continue to get rid of problematic artifacts, enchantments, and or lands. And then we have things that care about when you're putting cards into the graveyard, such as Bloodbriar, 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 2/3 plant elemental. Whenever you sacrifice another permanent, you put a +1 counter on this creature. Doesn't care about when things die, it cares about things being specifically sacrificed, which is what we're doing to our lands. And then we have Crawling Sensation. This is a 3 mana enchantment. It says, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may mill the top 2 cards of your library, meaning you put the top 2 from your library to your graveyard. And whenever a land card is put into... whenever 1 or more land cards is put into your graveyard from anywhere, for the first time each turn, I cannot parse that. The first time each turn, you will create a 1/1 green insect creature token. So if you mill 2 from this and then resolve the Gitrog trigger, if you hit a land off this and you sacrifice a land, you will still only end up with 1 insect that turn. So it's neat, it's nice, it can mill us, which we don't mind, but also gives us a steady stream of creatures to jump block and such. And then we have another card that I feel is criminally underplayed, very, very strong in my opinion, Aid from the Cowl. 5 mana, 3 green for an enchantment, and it has Revolt. The beginning of your end step, if a permanent card you controlled left the battlefield this turn, doesn't matter how it left, just left, whether it was bounced, whether it was sacrificed, whether it was exiled, doesn't matter. Reveal the top card of your library. If it's a permanent, you may put it on the battlefield. Otherwise, you may draw that card. Right? No, sorry. I'm going off memory here. Otherwise, you may put it at the bottom of your library. And I was like, that doesn't sound right. So you're going to sacrifice a land at the beginning of your turn. And at the end of your turn, you're going to reveal the top card of your library. And if it's a permanent, it stays on the field immediately without having to cast it. And then if it's not, it goes to the bottom of your deck. Another way to start getting lands into your graveyard are things like Grapple with the Past. This is a 2 mana instant, 1 and a green. Put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, and then you may return a land card from your grave to your hand. Great way to keep cycling through some of the lands that you've already got in there, while also digging for more things, which can draw you more cards. And then we have, similarly, Fork in the Road. 2 mana, 1 and a green for a sorcery. Search the library for 2 basic lands. Put 1 into your hand and 1 into your graveyard and shuffle. So you get a land to your hand to play for either that turn or the next. And you put a land in the graveyard, which will make you draw a card. Great effect. Love it for this deck. And then we also have Satyr Wayfinder. 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 1/1 Satyr. When it enters the battlefield, put the top 4 cards of your library. Look at the top 4 cards. You may put a land card from among them into your hand and put the rest in your graveyard. And this is a great way to additionally put lands in your graveyard and also draw. Note, if you put 2 lands in the graveyard at the same time, you only get 1 draw off of Gitrog Monster. And then we also have the Dirca. This is a 8 mana, 9/9 elephant, and when it enters the battlefield, you may destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent destroyed that way, its controller gets a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Usually this is used to destroy something that's a problematic, say, enchantment or artifact or something, in colors that don't typically have some sort of removal for it, or a deck that is only playing creatures or something, or ETB effects. For this, we can turn our lands into card draw and creatures. Very, very fun. Very, very powerful. And then for lands going onto the battlefield, we have things to synergize like Undergrowth Champion. This is a 3 mana 2/2, 1 green for an elemental. Whenever this creature is dealt damage, if it has a +1 counter on it, you may remove one of them and prevent all damage that would be dealt to it this way. And then it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on this creature. We're making 2 land drops a turn with Gitrog Monster, and we're going to be playing other cards to ramp and such. So great way to put counters on this. Speaking of putting counters on a creature, we have Oran Reef Hydra. This is a 6 mana, 4 green for a 5/5 Hydra with trample. It also has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on this creature. And if it was a forest specifically that entered the battlefield, doesn't matter if it's basic or not, put 2 +1 counters on it. And then we also have the Grazing Gladeheart. This is a 3 mana creature, 2 and a green for a 2/2 antelope. As landfall, whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 2 life. You don't have a may on that one. Great way to keep you going in case things are pinging you down or trying to aggro you out. The amount of lands that you can actually get onto the field with this out makes a huge difference. Now, we've talked about putting counters on things. We've talked about gaining life. Why not some mixture of the two? Retreat to Kazandu. This is a 3 mana enchantment, 2 and a green with landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may choose 1, put a +1 counter on target creature, or you gain 2 life. So sometimes it's nice to have your cake and eat it too. And then we have a handful of card draw options because we don't need a ton of them, seeing as our commander is going to draw lots of cards on his own. But we have things like Vampiric Rites, which is a 1 mana enchantment for a single black. You can pay 1 and a black, sacrifice a creature, gain a life, and draw a card. We've already established that we have lots of ways to make little tiny guys, and this is a good way to cash them in, turn them into life gain and card draw. We also have the Soul of the Harvest. This is a 6 mana 6/6 elemental with trample. And whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. The few things of note, it says may, which is really important. It doesn't force you to draw a card. 2, it says non-token creature. So it doesn't trigger off of the worms that we're making or the saprolings or the insects, but that's fine. It's a little bit more controlled because we can completely draw ourselves out of the deck on accident. And then a fun card draw spell is Rishkar's Expertise. 6 mana, 4 green for a sorcery. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 5 or less from your hand without paying its costs. So you're going to draw cards. Usually the commander or the Terrastodon are the biggest things on the field. So you're typically going to draw somewhere between 6 to 9 cards. Giggity. And then anything that's 5 cost or less, you can immediately play out of those cards that you just drew and out of the ones that are already in your hand. And then we have talked about the card draw. Let's talk about removal. Assuming that you have either some of these big creatures or especially your commander on the field, we have things like Rabid Bite. This is a 2 mana spell, 1 and a green for a sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you do not control. This is like a fight spell, but one way. It's a punch. So because this creature has Death Touch, any damage it deals to another creature will destroy it unless some other effect prevents that. Similarly, we have Nature's Way. Basically the same thing, except the creature also gets Vigilance and Trample. Because why not? A bit jankier and more expensive version of this kind of effect is Nissa's Judgment. So for 5 mana, 4 and a green for a sorcery, Support 2, meaning put 2 +1 counters on up to 2 creatures. I'm sorry, put a +1 counter on up to 2 creatures you control, and then choose target creature an opponent controls. Each creature you control with a +1 counter on it deals damage equal to its power to that creature. So we don't have a ton of ways to get +1 counters. We have a few with some of the cards we just saw, but it's a group punch if something is absolutely massive, or again, it doesn't matter how big it is, if we have Death Touch and we make it punch something we want dead. A bit more direct removal, doesn't require us to already have things, is Ruinous Path. This is 3 mana, 1 black for a sorcery, destroy target creature or planeswalker. Alternatively, you can pay 7 mana, 5 black, and in addition to the normal effect of the spell, you will also put 4 +1 counters on target land you control. It becomes a 0/0 elemental with haste and is still a land. Typically, you don't want to do this kind of thing, in my opinion. It's a bit risky in most decks because your lands are a bit more valuable and easily removed, because the easiest thing to remove in the game is a creature. However, you kind of don't care because it'll just replace itself. Lands are expendable in this deck. Now, a card that I think is criminally underplayed as far as removal goes is Oblivion Strike. It's not the optimal version of this type of effect, but it's damn good. 3 and a black for 4 mana. It's a sorcery. It has Devoid, meaning the spell is actually colorless. Meaning if something has protection from black, this can still target it. In fact, protection from any colors, this can still target it. And it says exile target creature. That's it. Just exile it. Don't kill it. Exile it. Gonzo for good. And then we have a bit of enchantment removal, or artifact and enchantment removal, in the form of Naturalize. 2 mana, 1 and a green for an instant, destroy a target artifact or enchantment. And then to round it off a little bit, we have that on a stick. Caustic Caterpillar, 1 green for a 1/1 insect, pay 1 and a green, sacrifice it, and destroy a target artifact or enchantment. Very, very similar, very, very simple. Redundancy is a thing that you would like to do in your decks. Now we have a handful of random utility, is what I've been calling these. They're good effects, but they're not core to the deck. But you know, you got a couple of things that you want to fill out the deck with, and you can't go wrong with a Panharmonicon. 4 mana for an artifact. If an artifact or creature you control entering the battlefield, I'm sorry, let me try this again. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield would trigger an effect of a permanent you control. There we go. To trigger, do it again, essentially. So, if an artifact or creature entering, do it again. If it triggers a thing. Typically, this is mostly done with, like, say, Terrastodon or the Soul of the Harvest, but there's a few niche cases. Again, kind of random utility. These are easily swapped out for other things that fit more of what I want to do if I find them. Next up is Bonds of Mortality. This is a 2 mana enchantment, 1 and a green, and when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, so it immediately replaces itself. And then for a single green mana, creatures your opponents control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. This is huge when you're trying to remove something that is problematic and hard to remove. Of note, you can use this effect in cooperation with your opponents to get rid of somebody else's thing that's scarier than you are. And then lastly in this category, we have the Prowling Serpapod. This is a 3 mana 4/3 for 1 green cat snake. It cannot be countered, and creature spells you control also cannot be countered. I don't think I have to explain the utility effect on that one. And that brings us around to the lands. Let's start with the non-basics. One of my favorite lands that I love so very much is Westvale Abbey. We've established that there's ways to get lots of creatures on the field, but 5 isn't that hard of a board state to achieve, especially because this helps you get there. So this is a land that taps for colorless, or you could pay 5 mana, tap it, pay 1 life, and put a 1/1 white and black human cleric creature token on the field. And then additionally, you could pay 5 mana, tap this, sacrifice 5 creatures to transform this into Ormondal the Profane Prince. So let's go ahead and pull this out of the sleeve and show you what that is. There we go. So Ormondal is a 9/7 with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. So this is a hard to remove creature that gets you a lot of value and can end the game out of nowhere if somebody's not paying attention. And because we have so many different land things going on, this tends to get overlooked pretty easily. Now, another land that I think a lot of newer players especially don't respect enough is Rogue's Passage. This is a land that taps for a colorless, and then for 4 mana and tap it, target creature can't be blocked this turn. 6 is a fairly sizable body, and if they don't block it enough times, the 6 can become 21 very quickly. And this helps it get in that last 1 or 2 attacks through their defenses. And then we have a suite of different dual lands, starting with the classic Command Tower. It's just going to be in pretty much every commander deck that's not a single color deck. And then we have Hissing Quagmire. This enters battlefield tapped. You can tap it to add either a green or black. And for 3 mana, 1 black and green, it becomes a 2/2 black and green elemental creature creature that's still a land, and it has Death Touch. So, fun fact, if you block with this, not only does it kill something in return, but it also draws you a card to replace it. And then we have Jungle Hollow. It is battlefield tapped. When it enters, you gain a life, and it taps for either green or black. Similarly, we have Foul Orchard, same thing, except it doesn't gain life. And then probably easily the worst of my mana base is something like the Vivid Lands here. We have the Vivid Marsh, enters the battlefield with 2 charge counters on it. You can tap it normally to add black, or you can tap it and remove a charge counter to add 1 mana of any color. If I find lands in my collection to upgrade, these are the first ones to take out. Similarly, we have the green version, same thing, but normally taps for green without having to remove the counters. And then out of the non-basics, we have Golgari Rot Farm. Great land. When it enters the battlefield, it enters tapped and bounces a land you control to your hand. And then it can tap for both green and black at the same time. So effectively ramp. You don't mind as much losing other lands when you have the Rot Farm on the field. And then other than that, we have the basics. We have forests, 13 of them. And then we have swamps, 8 of them. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the deck. I hope you've enjoyed this. Like I said, it's a bit more jank, a bit more casual. And this is the first video in the series. If you want to see more, please let me know. I have roughly like 20 something commander decks. If you want to see these decks played, we play every weekend, every Saturday night on our streams at twitch.tv/Dirca Monster, and we play over the internet with our paper decks thanks to spelltable.com. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you leave a rating, whether you like it or dislike it. Hit the appropriate button. Subscribe to see more content from us. And if you want to see a deck list, there we go, my brain broke for a moment. A deck list to this deck will be left below, a link to Moxfield. But I believe that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you for watching, but I will catch you guys later.